again, it's good to be with you. The text for tonight is a familiar one to many of you who've been in church. It's Matthew 21, 1 through 11. It's a story of Palm Sunday. One thing that you and I notice when we read the Gospel of Matthew is that there is a difference in the way the story is told in Matthew's Gospel and the way it's told in Mark and Luke and John. All four of the Gospels have the story of Palm Sunday. But in an interesting way, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples when they come into the village of Bethphage, I want you to go find a donkey and a colt and bring them to me. And the way the story is pictured is Jesus is riding both the donkey and the colt. In Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is riding only one animal. The reason that Matthew has this in his gospel is that Matthew is the most Jewish of all of the gospels. Matthew refers to the prophet. He doesn't give the name of the prophet, but the prophet is Zechariah. Zechariah 9:9. The king shall come riding, and he will be riding on a donkey and on a colt, the offspring of a donkey. Now, when Mark and Luke and John read this same passage, they said to themselves, why, this is just a parallelism. In other words, you've got one verse to talk about a donkey, and the second verse underneath to talk about the colt, the offspring of the donkey, just one animal. But Matthew is so Jewish and so literalistic. He has Jesus coming in on Palm Sunday, riding on two animals. It's a wonderful time in the life of Jesus. As he comes riding through this little village of Bethphage, a village that's really not noted for anything, kind of a small little group of people in this village. These people recognize Jesus for who he is. So many times in the ministry of Jesus, people really didn't know and understand who he was. Friend of tax collectors and sinners, telling parables that are different from the parables that the religious authorities would have told, taking issue with some of the things that the religious leaders believed were central to their faith. Almost everywhere that Jesus went, except for Bethphage, he was haunted by these strange questions. But in this little village of Palm Sunday, Jesus isn't haunted, he is honored. Hosanna. Hosanna, they say, which simply means to adore somebody, to worship somebody. The people with their palm branches, putting their cloaks in front of the animals as they move through in the Gospel of Matthew, shouting, this is the Son of David. Hosanna, the King of Kings. You almost, or I'm almost think, and maybe all of us think at times, Jesus should have just concluded his ministry in this little village of Bethphage. Why not make the last word in the gospel Palm Sunday? Because you have Jesus being worshiped. You have Jesus being honored. Jesus is being praised. the people see Jesus for who he is, why not just stay in Bethphage, in a place that knows who you are? But you and I know that it doesn't end in the village on Palm Sunday. Just a few miles down the road from this village on the Mount of Olives was a city bustling with all kinds of things that were happening. In fact, one of the words that is used about Jerusalem, the city, is that it was in tumult. Jesus comes in, and what does he do? Do you want to know what it is to ask for something? Jesus walked right into the temple, and he took the table that was filled with the money of the money changers, and he tipped the table over and dumped all the money on the floor. Who does Jesus think he is? Coming in to the center of Jewish faith, the center of religious faith, and dumping all of this money on the floor. And then he starts to tell stories about who he is. The stone that the mason has rejected has become the cornerstone, Eugene Peterson says. This is the work of God. Rub your eyes and then open them and see what God is doing. But the last word in Jerusalem is not the best word. The last word is that Jesus dies on a cross. 5 days after they have shouted, Hosanna, after they have said in that little village, this is the King of Kings, in a derisive sort of way, above the cross of Jesus, in 3 languages, this is the King of the Jews. Why, in that moment, it seemed as if everything was over. Sunday after Palm Sunday, the most amazing thing happens. We can't find Jesus. We've come to the tomb, but he's not here. Maybe somebody has stolen his body. But then he appears, and the dead man is walking and talking and living and preaching and bringing hope. The last word is the best word. I'm so grateful for Palm Sunday. Finally, Jesus gets the recognition he deserves. Just on a donkey or a colt, with his feet probably dragging in the sand as he came through on the parade, not on a great stallion as the Roman generals had, but this humble servant of God. And how grateful I am that people, at least for that one day in his life, understood who he was. Hosanna to the King of Kings. There's a rhythm in this passage, in this whole story from Palm Sunday, to Easter. And the rhythm is that you and I don't always live in the ecstasy of Palm Sunday. We sometimes live in the agony of Jerusalem, where things don't go the way we want. Yesterday, in our city or town of Georgetown, the minister at the First United Methodist Church, his funeral was held. His wife and he had been here for 2 years. I never met them, but a friend of mine told me about what was going on, the cancer that had spread through his body. And so I called and talked several times with his wife and how wonderful she was and gracious. But I thought to myself, this is the way that we live. There are moments in our lives that are just filled with joy and happiness. There are moments in our lives when we wonder if we can put one foot in front of the other. But friends, our hope is not in what we can do. Our hope is the last word is the best word. Jesus is alive.